morning. I'm Catherine Baird. It is a pleasure to be joining you remotely. I would much prefer being in Michigan, I must say, and having this conversation, but I'm really thrilled that we have this technology as I'm sitting in front of my computer in Denver and you're all sitting in front of your various computers throughout your community. Today, we're going to be talking about the Ethical Lens Inventory, the tool that you all took as part of your classes. We're going to be talking about how this helps you understand yourself and others as we begin to think about how to be more ethical in the work that we do in our communities. The question that we begin with is whether or not you can actually learn ethics. As we begin this conversation, we're going to have two pieces. One is how do you grow into the adult that you are preparing to become? As you came to Michigan State University, you had your value system from your parents, you had the value system from your community, and the time that you are spending together at the university is helping you understand who you want to be as you grow into a professional. Out of this, you'll want to know how to choose behaviors that count for being good in the community. What does that look like as you're making decisions day to day? Now, most of you will have no problem identifying your core values and commitments. You know what's important to you. You know what matters. What is a more problematic conversation is your shadow side. Where can you be tempted? When we begin to look at business data points and why people and companies do unethical things, oftentimes they're under pressure. They are worried about whether they're going to make deliverables, whether they're going to make enough money. All of those aspects go into pushing people to do things that otherwise they would not do. Learning about your shadow side, learning where you could be tempted becomes a really important part of becoming an ethical human being. Now, as we do this work together, we're going to have three definitions that are important. The first is your morality. Each of you have a set of personal values and motives that's important to you that ground you in who you are. You then live in community, and there are actions that count for meeting shared community values. Right now, we have a whole new set of values as all of us are dealing with COVID-19. In my office, we are standing 6 feet away from each other. We're making sure we wash our hands. We very quickly came together with a new set of values, a new set of being together in order to be ethical. And then as we are professionals, we share and have mutually enforced professional norms. And this is where community becomes very important in helping us understand what it means to live into the best of who we can be. Now, when I was your age, I was very confused. I had the question, if everybody is so clear about what to do, if you can just follow your gut, why are there so many different answers? And the reason is it depends. As we think about what we do on an ongoing basis, we take a look at the context that we're in, we take a look at the people we are with, we take a look at who is showing up in our space, and out of that array of values, we can then choose the best path forward. Now, this becomes our primary conversation in ethics. It turns out that every ethical theory, every conversation you have about ethics is going to be a conversation on two equal axes. The first one is the individual versus the community. When does the individual get to say, here's what I'm going to do, here's what's going on, I'm going to exercise my own autonomy, and when does the community get to say, we are going to expect you to behave differently? Now, as you and I are living through this wonderful, interesting times with this epidemic, we're seeing this conversation play out in spades. I happen to be in the demographic that is supposed to be very careful. And my daughter called me and said, now, Mom, you are staying home. You are not going out. And I said, I am very healthy. I can go out to dinner. Now, Mother, you need to be careful. And that's an example of that conversation as all of us are making decisions about, are we going to stay home? When we go out, how do we interact with each other? Our businesses are making decisions about how long they're going to stay open, what they're going to do with their employees, and how they're going to treat each other. Ongoing conversation between the individual and the community. That also plays out between the head and the heart as we decide how are we going to manage the protocols, what is going to be the process that we have as we begin to move forward, and when do we let our heart rule and have some flexibility. We're seeing that conversation playing out in terms of sick leave policies. If we only have a certain amount of sick leave, do we pay people for sick leave? Do we pay people to quarantine? We don't want people to come to work when they're sick. We don't want them to be with others when they're sick. So how do we balance our head and our heart as we are dealing with this particular pandemic? And so this becomes the conversation that we have around every ethical decision that we make. It turns out that there are 4 different ways of looking at this decision. The responsibilities lens has members of the community, members who are individuals using their reason to determine the principles by which they're going to live. And you see words up here like truthful, accountable, transparent becoming very important to them. Down in the results lens, individuals following their heart determine what they're going to do, what goals they're going to pursue. And you'll notice the words are things like happy, good results, free will. On the relationship side, we have members of the community using their head to determine what processes and what systems we're going to have in place in order to live into our responsibilities. And we see this happening to us in real time as companies in the community are deciding, can we have people more than 50 people in a room? When do we cancel events? When do we tell people they need to stay home? All of that conversation in the justice theory is living in real time with us today as we are deciding what is fundamentally fair about what to do. One of the examples we had in Denver is that yesterday all of the ski slopes were closed. We had an outbreak of the virus up in the mountain towns, and a gentleman from Florida tweeted up to our governor saying, "How dare you do this? We're just ruining a vacation." And the governor said, "We're very sorry about ruining the vacation, and we have to protect people." And the retort back was, "Well, it would have been nice to have had a little bit of notice." Disney gave people 3 to 4 days notice so they could adjust their travel plans. That would be an example of how that process plays out. How much notice do you give? How do you treat people fairly in the relationship lens? And then down in the reputation lens, members of the community following their heart get to determine what counts for being courageous, what counts for being virtuous. How do we treat each other differently? I did go out to dinner, even though my daughter told me to stay home, and I found myself tipping the waiter more money than I usually would because I knew that the number of people were way down from what he usually had, and that this was a source of income and nobody was there. And so I made a decision to overtip out of this particular situation. And that becomes how you and I live into the best of being in community. So how does this play out for you all? Well, what we know is that you and I make sense of our world out of what happens to us. I had a good friend who said, "How does it feel to be in prison now since you can't go out?" And I said, "How does it feel to have a retreat, to be able to go and be by myself and to get some gardening done and some writing done that otherwise I would not have?" The same event interpreted differently based on how we choose the meaning of what's going to happen to us. We also have the opportunity to realize that the whole planet is impacted by our decisions. One of the things that happened during what we call the modern era is that human beings were more important than the plants. One of my very favorite theorists from Gonzaga, whose name is Brian, had the following example. He said, in the ordinary food chain of life, a horse is more important than grass. But if there is no grass, you wind up with the grass needing to grow and to be replenished being more important than the horse. And there are times when you and I as individuals have to take a look at the planet as a whole, our community as a whole, as being more important than us. And then you and I get to choose how we're going to live. One of the beliefs that I have is that every small decision we make is going to impact our lives and impact those around us. Part of the decisions you guys get to make as you're moving to all online classes is how much of your homework you're really going to do, how much of the reading you're really going to do. How can you support your faculty members who are using often a very different way of interacting with you in a way that will make the classes be as effective as possible? Are you going to be an active participant, or are you going to let other people be in control? So with that, we have our 4 ethical lenses, and you all then took your ethical lens inventory. You all completed your 36 items that allowed you to decide what it is that you believe. And as you did this, you should have found it hard to say, well, in this situation, I would have done that. In this situation, I might have done something different. What the ethical lens inventory mirrors and matches is what you do when your back is against the wall. We have what we call fast thinking and slow thinking. In fast thinking, it's repetitive, it's quick, it's before you think, you just act. Slow thinking, you slow down a bit and think about what's going on. And the ELI tells you what you do in fast thinking, what you do when you're just being reactive to what's going on in your environment. So this is Dr. Behan's class. This was 187 of you. And you can see how you're all over the map. You've got people way up in the responsibilities lens, people way down in the reputation lens, and then batches of you clustering in the middle. And you can see from this graphic how diverse your group is. Then if we go to Professor Kim's class, we see that her students are down more in the reputation lens, but again, all over the place and all over their value commitments as they look at what they're doing. So what does this mean? Well, we have had about 500,000 or more people who have completed the ethical lens inventory. And Michigan State University students are very typical. We had the whole batch of you up in the responsibilities lens. We had a whole nother body of you down the reputation lens. But this lets us know that different people will interact with the same situation from a different set of core values. Depending on where you landed, you had 57 different explanations. These came out of the way you prioritize your values. As I go around and talk to students in many different settings and ask them, was your description accurate? The answer was pretty much yes. We learned ethics in community, and the descriptions of these lenses come out of the way people in similar lenses look at how they look at ethics and what they do with ethics. Now, we didn't have any of you in these classes on the far edges, but people who are on the far edge have strong commitments and difficulties working with different thinking people. And so as they begin to think of how to work with themselves, they think only of their framework. Now, we have someone over on the far autonomy side, but if you go down to the bottom here with these people down in the sensibility corner, they would be as committed to their viewpoint as others. We had a whole bunch of you all in the middle. And people in the middle can see all sides of a question. But because they can see all sides, they sometimes have a difficulty making a decision and can very much be informed by their peers and go along with peer pressure. And so part of what we want to do is to have enough strength, enough understanding of who we are, that we can in fact act out of our core values as opposed to just go along with the crowd. Now, some of you are on the line. And for this one, you use the weaknesses and strengths of both. So what value does this have? As you begin to think back about that scatter plot, what you understand is that each of us values these, prioritizes these values differently. And so as you look at this little piece, you see that responsibilities lens values self-knowledge, the relationship lens values advocacy for others. And this tells us how we interact with ourselves and others. Now, when we go into decision making, it's a little bit more difficult because we have to listen to the values of other people and think about how those values can be changed into behaviors. As we're working with other people, if we know that they live in a different lens than ours, we can use their words and their language to help us understand how best to work with them and how to respond to their values. As we look and listen, we find out that language and keywords become really important. Now, some behavior can be justified using the values of different lenses. The example I always give here is truth-telling. So one of the reasons that you would be a truth teller in the responsibilities lens is to build trust, to make sure that people understand who you are and can value you. Down in the results lens, you will want to tell the truth because you want people to have all the options available, all the information they need to make good choices. In the relationship lens, you want to make sure that enough truth is being told that people can get a sense of fairness, that they're being treated the same as other people. And then down the reputation lens, you want to tell the truth because you want to be seen as a leader, as someone who is able to be followed. And so as we see behaviors and values that are shared, it's important to ask the question, do we all see these values differently? Do we see them the same? And then how can we work together in order to get to the best result. The part that none of us like to take a look at is our blind spots, that part of us that behaves badly under stress and under tension. Most of us have places of reflection, of action that we don't ever think about that annoy others when we're not paying attention. Those are our blind spots. Temptations are faced when we're under stress. Now, I assume that none of you had any issues with your vices because you all are not choosing to act unethically. The key to dealing with your blind spots is paying attention. Notice when you snap at somebody. Notice when you retreat and don't talk. Notice when your stomach hurts because you feel that you have been invalidated in some way. Notice when somebody gets a scowl on their face because you have invalidated them. What the research will tell us is that if you believe that your values and whoever you're working with are not in harmony, one of the two of you will behave badly. You'll withdraw, you'll act out, you'll take it out on yourself. And so learning to pay attention to when we are under stress and when we are not in agreement becomes very important in order to exercise and to be very ethical. So as we begin to take a look then about what does this mean for us as we move into decision making, we realize that each of these four lenses has a different definition for what behaviors count for being ethical, what behaviors count for how you make a decision, and what processes they use for making those decisions. So those of you in the responsibilities lens, you begin to things like, how do I use my reason to figure out my universal principles? In the results lens, you ask a question, how can I make a choice that contribute to my happiness? Over in the relationship lens, the focus is going to be processes of justice. How do we make sure that all people are able to live together in some sense of harmony? And then down in the reputation lens, how can we agree on the various character traits that represent virtuous living? Ethics is about translating your values into action. Ethics is about doing what is required to live into the best way of being in community. And so as we bring this section to a close, I invite you to think about your ethical lens inventory, to think about the values that you have, and then to begin to think about how you can more effectively and more mindfully live into those values in everything that you do. Thank you for this time together, and we will see you next time as we begin to talk about how to make more effective decisions in all that you do.